Hello everyone and welcome to the podcast on the ideal human diet for humans. What if there were a way of eating that maximizes our chances of living as long as possible in the best possible health? And what if the ingredients we consume every day had an impact on our life expectancy and on the likelihood of developing a more or less serious chronic disease? And what if it were possible through optimal nutrition to achieve an ideal body weight, whether we are sedentary or athletic? And what if nutrition could give us the best possible physical, mental, and cognitive shape without energy crashes, uncontrollable cravings, and with the best possible concentration? Starting with nutrition to maximize your health, your figure, your physical and mental fitness. Now that's not such a far-fetched idea. The influence of nutrition on health is a premise accepted by the scientific community. However, the solutions proposed so far remain completely vague. In fact, advice like eating a balanced diet, less fat, less salt, less sugar, is not really actionable advice. Of course, nutrition does not replace medicine, but as a complement to treatment or as prevention, eating in the most optimal way is already giving yourself the best possible chance. So, to develop the Blooness diet, I focused on what actually worked and simply on what worked. I went through hundreds of archives, testimonials, and scientific studies, and I simply did a synthesis of all that information. I synthesized the best practices in terms of nutrition. But for what purpose? For the best possible health and ideal body weight to achieve the greatest possible longevity. There is a common denominator among all human beings, a foundation that brings together the basics and actually allows us to benefit from what nature has best to offer in terms of nutrition. Each person, depending on their genetic makeup, metabolism, as well as their goals and preferences, can adapt this diet and make it their own. Nevertheless, this ideal is based on a few key pillars. The very first of these foundational pillars is a significant and drastic reduction in the overall carbohydrate intake. This is what is known as a low-carb, high-fat diet, or ketogenic in its strictest form. It involves reducing carbohydrate and sugar intake in favor of fats, which have been unfairly demonized since the 1960s. We will come back to this later. The second pillar is the diet of the blue zones. These are regions of the world where life expectancy is record-breaking and lifestyle diseases are rare. We will also take a look at the Paleolithic diet, considering that our bodies have not yet adapted to the radical changes brought about since the Neolithic Revolution, which marked the advent of agriculture more than 10,000 years ago, and even less so since the Industrial Revolution. Finally, we will look at veganism and flexitarianism, which together form a kind of synthesis, because by reducing meat consumption, we inevitably shift toward a blue zone type diet with more plant-based foods, more vegetables, and more fats. And we get closer to what our ancestors used to eat. The goal is not to follow these 4 diets to the letter, but to draw inspiration from them and take the best they have to offer. The Blooness diet is not a diet in the traditional sense. It's simply a set of tips to adapt to your daily life in order to maximize the chances of giving your body the best possible fuel. It's not yet another low-calorie diet based on frustration and deprivation. On the contrary, this type of eating is based on rich, generous meals that focus on the pleasure of good food. Nor is it a dogmatic approach to eating that forbids certain indulgences. Finally, this kind of diet obviously does not replace conventional medicine. If you are being treated for any illness, talk to your doctor about it. And for the more adventurous among you, I invite you to move on to part 1 of the Blooness diet, namely the low carbohydrate diet. Let's get started.